The evening air in the small town was calm, almost too calm. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional sound of cars passing by or distant laughter from people heading home after work. Officer Daniel had been on patrol for a few hours already. It was one of those nights where everything seemed normal, nothing out of place. He walked slowly down the street, keeping his eyes on the sidewalk and the street corners, making sure everything seemed right. He had done this many times before, but tonight something felt different. Up ahead, he noticed a small crowd gathering near a convenience store. People were standing together, talking loudly, some gesturing with their hands. There had been reports of a disturbance earlier, a minor argument between a few people, and now Daniel needed to check it out. His heart rate picked up a little as he approached, a mixture of responsibility and tension making him alert. He wanted to keep everything under control. As he got closer, his eyes fell on a man standing at the edge of the crowd. The man was tall, calm, and observing everything around him. Daniel didn't recognize him. For a split second, his mind filled with assumptions. The man wasn't doing anything threatening, but something about his posture, the way he held himself, made Daniel nervous. He remembered the stories he had heard about officers being caught off guard, about situations escalating too quickly. His fingers itched toward the pepper spray on his belt. He wanted to act fast to prevent any potential danger, even though nothing seemed immediately wrong. In a moment he would later regret, Daniel reached for the spray. He told himself he was doing the right thing, protecting the crowd, making sure nothing got out of hand. He didn't notice the man's calm expression, the way he seemed patient, waiting for the chaos around him to settle. In an instant, Daniel aimed the spray and released it. The mist shot toward the man, hitting him squarely in the face. The man blinked rapidly, covering his eyes with his hands, trying to shield himself. His expression never turned angry. He didn't yell or fight back. Instead, he simply took a step back, allowing the spray to affect him, and waited for it to wear off. The crowd gasped, some shouting at Daniel to stop, others rushing forward to help the man. The atmosphere changed instantly from curiosity to shock. People pulled out their phones, recording the incident. Daniel froze for a moment, the weight of what he had done sinking in slowly. Wait, calm down," Daniel shouted, his voice tight with stress, but it didn't make the crowd any quieter. The man, still blinking and wiping his face, looked at Daniel. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet patience. That made Daniel feel even more uneasy. He expected rage, confrontation, maybe even an argument. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the murmurs and gasps of the crowd. It didn't take long for the video to spread. Someone had uploaded it to social media almost immediately. Within minutes, the video was shared across platforms. Comments began pouring in, criticizing the officer's actions, questioning why he had acted so quickly without assessing the situation. People speculated, argued, and expressed outrage. Daniel could feel the tension rising not only around him but across the town. He knew that this single action would not just affect his night, it could follow him for a long time. Meanwhile, the man recovered from the spray. He didn't retaliate, didn't escalate the situation, and didn't yell. He simply adjusted his clothing, wiped his eyes, and took a deep breath. There was a quiet strength in him, a kind of patience that Daniel had never seen before in moments like this. The man finally turned and walked away slowly, not angrily, not in a rush, but deliberately, as if nothing had shaken him. That calmness made Daniel feel a wave of guilt. He knew he had overreacted. He realized that he had judged the man too quickly, let fear and assumptions control his actions. For Daniel, it was a moment of reflection. He walked back to his patrol car, the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a gnawing unease. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. Had he really done the right thing? Could he have handled it differently? Even as the night went on, he couldn't shake the image of the man standing there calmly, waiting, patient and composed, while Daniel had acted in panic. The people in the crowd whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others discussing what they had witnessed. Everyone seemed to feel the weight of the moment. It was more than just a simple misunderstanding. It was a reflection of the tension that had been quietly building between the community and the police for years. People were frustrated, scared, and cautious, and this incident only reminded them of the fragile balance that existed. Daniel's colleagues soon arrived on the scene. They tried to calm him down, but he was already aware that the situation had taken a life of its own. He could see the anger and concern in their eyes, and even their presence didn't make him feel any better. He knew that the video would travel far beyond this street, beyond this town, and that he would have to face questions, criticisms, and perhaps serious consequences. As the crowd dispersed and the streets slowly returned to normal, Daniel remained standing, staring at the spot where the man had been. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This was more than a routine patrol or a minor confrontation. Something about the man, the calmness, the patience, and the dignity with which he had handled the incident stayed with Daniel. It was haunting in a way he didn't expect. He began to understand that there was more to being an officer than quick reactions and authority. It was about understanding people, seeing beyond assumptions, and acting with thoughtfulness. That night, Daniel went home feeling restless. The quiet of his apartment didn't bring peace. Instead, he replayed every moment, every decision, every flicker of doubt that had crossed his mind. He realized that this single moment would stay with him forever, shaping the way he thought about authority, judgment, and the people he was sworn to protect. The incident wasn't just about fear or a split-second decision. It was about human behavior, bias, and the importance of seeing the full picture before acting. Meanwhile, the man's calmness became the subject of conversation throughout the town. People talked about him with respect, noting his patience, dignity, and composure. Even those who had been critical of law enforcement paused to reflect on how someone could handle such a situation without anger or confrontation. There was a quiet admiration growing, a sense that this man had shown something more powerful than any words could describe. For Daniel, the next day brought a new reality. The video had spread beyond the town, and people were talking, debating, and forming opinions. He knew that he would have to face questions from his superiors, the public, and himself. The fear he had acted on would no longer be excused as a momentary lapse. He realized that every action, every decision had consequences, and that this incident would be a turning point in his life and career. As he prepared to go back to work, Daniel couldn't shake one thought. Who exactly was this man he had sprayed? There was something about his presence, his calmness, and his authority that suggested he wasn't just an ordinary bystander. Little did Daniel know the answer to that question would change everything. The incident that began as a simple, chaotic moment on a quiet street was only the beginning. It would set in motion events that would challenge Daniel's understanding of leadership, accountability, and human dignity. It would confront him with a truth he could not ignore, that sometimes, the people we judge most quickly are the ones who have the power to teach us the most important lessons. That night, Daniel lay awake thinking about the man, thinking about what had happened and wondering if he would ever get a chance to make things right. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter would not only change his life but also the entire town, and perhaps even the way he understood himself. He could feel deep down that this was not just an ordinary incident. Something larger was at play, and he would soon discover just how profound that truth would be. The morning after the incident, the town was buzzing with talk of what had happened. People were discussing the video online, in cafes, on street corners, and in grocery stores. Some were angry, some confused, and others curious. Among them, there was one person whose day started like any other, but he was unaware of the storm that had taken place the night before. That person was Jonathan. Jonathan was not a stranger to responsibility or attention. He had spent his life serving the community in many ways, quietly and steadily. People knew him as someone who could be trusted, someone who would listen before judging, and someone who believed in fairness above all else. He had grown up in this town, experiencing both the kindness and the struggles of his neighbors. Over the years, he had worked in local organizations, volunteered in schools, and participated in community programs. He had always been aware of the gap between law enforcement and the community, and he had longed for a day when things could change for the better. Recently, Jonathan had been given a new role, one that carried immense responsibility. He had been appointed as the new police chief of the town. It was not an easy decision for the council, but they had chosen him because of his integrity, his dedication, and his deep understanding of the community. People were quietly hopeful that his leadership would bring reform, restore trust, and create a stronger connection between the police and the citizens. Jonathan had accepted the role with humility. He knew it was not about power or authority. It was about service, about making real change in the lives of the people he cared about. On that morning, Jonathan was going through his usual routine. He woke up early, prepared a simple breakfast, and reviewed his schedule for the day. He had meetings planned with officers, community leaders, and local residents. Every decision he made, he considered carefully, thinking about the long-term impact on the town. He believed in leading by example, showing patience, respect, and understanding, even in situations where others might act out of fear or anger. Meanwhile, the video of the previous night's incident had reached him. People had started recognizing him in the footage, and many were shocked when they realized who had been sprayed. Jonathan had seen countless moments of injustice and misunderstanding in his life, but this was unusual. Instead of anger, he felt a calm focus. He understood that this incident could be an opportunity, not just for the town, but for Officer Daniel as well. It could be a moment that taught lessons about patience, responsibility, and humility. Jonathan reflected on what had happened. He remembered standing there, sprayed, blinded temporarily, yet remaining calm. He had chosen not to react with anger because he knew the larger picture mattered more than that one moment. He knew that his response would speak louder than words, and that it could influence not only the officer involved, but the whole community. He believed that leadership was about guiding others, even when they had made mistakes. The community, unaware of the depth of his experience, was slowly starting to see pieces of who Jonathan was. Neighbors, shopkeepers, and local residents spoke of his calm nature, his fairness, and his ability to listen without judgment. People remembered the small acts he had done quietly over the years, helping families in need, mediating disputes, and supporting local youth programs. This incident, though sudden and dramatic, reflected his character even more clearly than his past work. His patience in the face of being wronged was a living example of the qualities that had earned him the position of police chief. Jonathan also thought about Officer Daniel. He knew that Daniel had acted out of fear and assumption, not malice. He understood that Daniel, like many officers, had been trained to react quickly, to protect himself and the public. Yet he also knew that mistakes like this could damage trust, stir anger, and create fear. Jonathan believed that instead of reacting with public punishment, he could use this as a teaching moment. He could guide Daniel, help him understand the importance of thoughtfulness, patience, and human connection in policing. In his mind, that could create a ripple effect of change far beyond just one officer. As Jonathan prepared for the day, he began thinking about how to address the town's concerns. He knew there would be questions, criticisms, and discussions. He wanted to show people that the police could be fair, transparent, and accountable. He planned to speak openly, to explain that mistakes could happen, but that they could also be corrected with honesty, humility, and leadership. He wanted to bridge the gap between the police and the community, and he understood that this moment, as uncomfortable as it was, could become a turning point. Throughout the day, he met with several officers and staff at the department. Jonathan's approach was calm but firm. He explained that leadership was not about punishment alone, but about guidance. He shared his vision for the department, a vision that included respect for every citizen, accountability for every action, and continuous learning for every officer. His words were met with a mixture of curiosity, relief, and hope. Officers realized that under Jonathan's leadership, there was a chance to rebuild trust, improve practices, and become better in ways they had not considered before. Meanwhile, the news of the incident continued to spread. Social media discussions grew heated, and local news outlets were covering the story extensively. Jonathan understood that public perception was delicate. He made a conscious choice to remain calm, to focus on what he could control, his response, his actions, and the example he set. He did not post angry messages or engage in debates online. Instead, he prepared to address the community in person, to show that leadership could be steady, thoughtful, and fair. Back in the department, Jonathan took time to review the footage from the night before. He watched carefully, analyzing each moment. He noted Daniel's hesitation, his fear, and the quick decision to spray. He also noted the calmness and dignity of the man in the video. Every detail mattered. Jonathan knew that understanding these moments fully would help him guide Daniel effectively and prevent similar incidents in the future. He was committed to ensuring that fear and assumptions would not dictate actions in the department again. Later that afternoon, Jonathan walked through the town. People recognized him, some nodding with respect, others approaching to ask questions or share their concerns. He listened patiently, speaking calmly, answering honestly and acknowledging the fears that people had. He knew that rebuilding trust required more than words. It required consistent action, empathy, and integrity. Every interaction he had reinforced the idea that leadership was about service, not power, and that the trust of the community was earned through respect, understanding, and fairness. In the evening, Jonathan reflected on the events of the day. He thought about the incident with Officer Daniel, the community's reaction, and his own role as a leader. He realized that this was a defining moment for the town, for the department, and for the people involved. It was a chance to show that mistakes could be met with patience and understanding, that guidance and mentorship could replace anger and punishment, and that leadership could be a force for positive change. He also thought about the future. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, criticism, and difficult decisions, but he believed in the power of example. By remaining calm, fair, and patient, he could influence not only Officer Daniel but the entire department. He could show the town that change was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that true leadership required humility and vision. As night fell, Jonathan prepared to rest. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and new opportunities to lead. He felt a quiet confidence, not from power or authority, but from the knowledge that he could act with integrity and fairness in every situation. He understood that the events of the past night were more than just a personal incident. They were part of a larger story about leadership, responsibility, and the potential for change in a community that desperately needed it. Jonathan went to bed that night knowing that he had the strength to face whatever came next. The town, the department, and Officer Daniel would all soon see the impact of his calm, thoughtful leadership. This was not just a moment of reflection for Jonathan. It was the beginning of a journey that could change the lives of everyone involved. And in the quiet of his room, he allowed himself a small moment of hope, knowing that patience, understanding, and guidance could truly make a difference. The next morning, the town was still buzzing about the incident. People were talking in cafes, at bus stops, and in grocery stores. Social media was full of videos and comments, with opinions pouring in from every direction. Many were upset, others confused, and some were eager to learn what would happen next. The story had captured attention beyond the small town, sparking discussions about policing, fear, and responsibility. Inside the police department, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Daniel arrived early, his mind heavy with worry. He knew the incident from the night before had changed everything. The video had gone viral, and the reactions from the public were strong. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, some filled with curiosity, some with judgment. He walked through the hallways quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention, though he knew that avoiding it wouldn't help. The moment he had acted impulsively had consequences that now seemed unavoidable. Daniel went to his desk and sat down, staring at the computer screen. Messages from superiors, news articles, and comments from the community had piled up overnight. He read each one, feeling a mixture of fear, regret, and embarrassment. He replayed the video countless times in his mind. Every blink of the man's eyes, every subtle gesture, reminded him that he had acted without thinking, driven by fear and assumption. The weight of it pressed down on him like never before. Across town, Jonathan began his day as he always did, with a calm focus. He had already seen the video, though he had watched it with measured attention. He understood the fear and assumptions that had influenced Daniel's actions. He didn't feel anger. Instead, he saw an opportunity to guide, to teach, and to prevent similar mistakes in the future. Jonathan knew that his response would influence not only Daniel, but the department and the community as a whole. He prepared for meetings, conversations, and public statements with a mindset of patience, fairness, and leadership. The local news crew arrived at the police department to ask questions. They wanted statements, opinions, and reactions. Jonathan met them calmly, addressing their concerns with honesty. He acknowledged that mistakes could happen, but emphasized that the focus should be on learning, accountability, and positive change. He spoke about transparency, about building trust, and about the responsibility of the police to serve the community with fairness and respect. His words resonated with many viewers. People saw not just a police chief, but a leader who understood the weight of actions and decisions. Back at the department, Daniel received instructions to attend a meeting with Jonathan. He felt nervous, unsure of what to expect. He had imagined anger, reprimand, or even humiliation. But as he approached the office where the meeting would take place, he noticed Jonathan waiting patiently, calm and composed. That composure made Daniel even more uneasy. He had expected confrontation, but instead he saw a calm presence, someone who did not seem intent on punishment but on understanding. The meeting began with Jonathan speaking in a steady, measured tone. He asked Daniel to recount what had happened the night before, to explain his perspective. Daniel hesitated at first, then told the story, describing his fear, his assumptions, and the moment he decided to use the pepper spray. As he spoke, Jonathan listened carefully without interruption. His focus was on understanding Daniel's thought process, not on criticism. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. Jonathan's eyes were calm, and his voice carried a tone of understanding rather than anger. He spoke about the importance of observation, patience, and restraint. He explained that fear could cloud judgment, and that assumptions could lead to mistakes. He emphasized that every action a police officer took had consequences, not just for themselves, but for the community they served. Daniel listened, feeling a mix of shame and relief. He realized that Jonathan was not trying to humiliate him or punish him. Instead, he was being given a chance to learn, to grow, and to understand the deeper responsibilities of his role. For the first time, Daniel began to see the incident not just as a mistake, but as an opportunity, a moment that could shape him into a better officer if he approached it with humility and openness. Jonathan continued, sharing examples from his own experience, explaining how leadership was not about authority alone, but about guiding others, setting examples and making decisions that earned trust rather than fear. He spoke about empathy, accountability, and the role of communication in preventing misunderstandings. Every word resonated with Daniel. He began to understand that his actions had affected more than just the man in the video. They had affected public perception, trust, and his own integrity as a police officer. As the conversation progressed, Daniel began to ask questions. He wanted to know how he could prevent mistakes like this in the future, how he could regain trust, and how he could better serve the community. Jonathan answered patiently, offering guidance, strategies, and advice. He emphasized the importance of self-reflection, continuous learning, and remaining calm under pressure. He encouraged Daniel to view every encounter as an opportunity to build understanding, to protect without fear, and to lead with integrity. Outside the department, the community continued to react to the incident. People were talking about what they had seen, sharing opinions and expressing concerns. Some were skeptical about whether real change could happen, while others felt a cautious sense of hope. Jonathan's approach, both in public and within the department, slowly began to influence perception. People noticed that he did not respond with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he focused on solutions, accountability, and guidance. His leadership became an example of how to handle difficult situations with fairness and calm. Meanwhile, Daniel started reflecting on his own behavior more deeply. He realized that fear had driven his actions, but he also recognized that fear could be managed with awareness and training. He thought about the community, the people he had sworn to protect, and the trust that needed to be rebuilt. He knew that simply apologizing would not be enough. He needed to change, to approach his duties with humility, patience, and a commitment to fairness. Over the next few days, Daniel began attending training sessions focused on community relations, bias awareness, and communication skills. He worked closely with Jonathan, learning not just the technical aspects of policing but the human aspects, how to read situations carefully, how to listen, how to build trust, and how to lead by example. Jonathan's mentorship was firm but encouraging. He challenged Daniel to think critically, reflect deeply, and act responsibly. The community slowly began to notice changes as well. People who had initially been angry or skeptical began to see a different side of the department. Officers, influenced by Jonathan's leadership and Daniel's growing awareness, started approaching their duties with more thoughtfulness. They engaged with the public in a respectful manner, listened to concerns, and handled situations with care. The atmosphere began to shift, from tension and distrust to cautious optimism and hope. Daniel personally felt a transformation. He began to understand that being an officer was not just about enforcing rules but about serving people with empathy and respect. He realized that his actions could either build trust or destroy it, and that every decision mattered. The incident that had once caused shame and fear became a turning point, a lesson in humility, responsibility, and leadership. As weeks passed, Jonathan's guidance continued to shape Daniel and the department. The community noticed the positive changes, and conversations began to focus on solutions rather than criticism. People shared stories of officers handling situations with patience, of misunderstandings being resolved calmly, and of a growing sense of safety and trust. Jonathan's approach, rooted in understanding and leadership, was proving effective. By the end of this period, Daniel had not only learned from the incident, but had also begun to demonstrate growth in his role. He approached encounters with more awareness, listened before acting, and prioritized communication and trust. He realized that mistakes could be powerful lessons if met with humility and the willingness to change. The incident that had once seemed like a moment of shame and controversy had now become a catalyst for growth, reflection, and positive change. Jonathan's calm and thoughtful leadership, combined with Daniel's willingness to learn, created a story of transformation that extended beyond the department to the entire community. People began to see that real change was possible, and that leadership grounded in patience, fairness, and integrity could make a lasting difference. Daniel often reflected on that night, the man in the video, and the lesson he had learned. He understood that fear and assumptions could mislead anyone, but with guidance, self-reflection, and humility, mistakes could be transformed into growth. The town, once skeptical and tense, now witnessed the power of thoughtful leadership and accountability. Jonathan's influence, calmness, and commitment to justice had turned a potentially divisive incident into a moment of learning, healing, and hope. And though the memory of the spray, the fear, and the tension remained, Daniel no longer saw it as a shameful moment alone. He saw it as a chance to improve, to serve better, and to understand the true meaning of responsibility and leadership. He knew that the lessons from that night would stay with him forever, guiding his actions and shaping the way he interacted with the community for years to come. The day arrived when Daniel was to meet Jonathan alone, face to face. Daniel felt a mix of nervousness and apprehension as he walked through the doors of the police department. He had spent days thinking about what he might say, how he could explain himself, and whether an apology would be enough. The memory of the spray, the crowd, and the shocked faces of bystanders played over and over in his mind. He had imagined a confrontation full of anger, criticism, and perhaps even humiliation. But now, as he approached Jonathan's office, he noticed a calm presence. Jonathan was already there, standing quietly, waiting with his usual composed demeanor. The sight of Jonathan's calmness made Daniel pause. It was different from anything he expected. He had prepared himself for harsh words or judgment, but instead he saw someone who exuded patience and understanding. Jonathan's posture, relaxed yet attentive, conveyed that he was not there to punish. Daniel's heart raced, but a small part of him felt a sense of relief. Maybe there was a chance for this meeting to be constructive, a chance to learn instead of being condemned. Jonathan greeted him with a simple nod, inviting him to sit. The silence at first was heavy, filled with tension, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a pause that seemed to ask Daniel to reflect, to slow down, and to consider his actions. Daniel took a deep breath and began, recounting the events of the night. He explained his fear, his assumptions, and how quickly he had acted without thinking. His words came hesitantly at first, then more freely, as he realized that Jonathan was not interrupting or judging, but listening carefully. Jonathan waited until Daniel had finished, then spoke in a calm, steady voice. He did not yell, scold, or accuse. Instead, he asked questions, gently prompting Daniel to think about why he had reacted the way he did. "What were you feeling at that moment?" he asked. "What made you think that action was necessary?" Daniel paused, considering the question. He realized that fear had taken over, that he had allowed assumptions to drive his behavior. He admitted it, and Jonathan listened, nodding, encouraging him to continue. Jonathan then shared his perspective. He spoke about the responsibility that came with being a police officer, the weight of every decision, and the consequences of acting without full understanding. He emphasized that leadership was not about asserting authority, but about guiding others, making thoughtful decisions and fostering trust. Daniel listened intently, feeling the depth of the lesson. He understood that this conversation was not just about the incident, but about what kind of officer he wanted to become. As the conversation continued, Jonathan used examples from his own experience. He talked about times when he had faced misunderstandings, moments when fear or assumptions could have led to mistakes, and how he had learned to pause, observe, and act with care. His words were clear, practical, and grounded in real-life lessons. Daniel began to see the incident in a new light. It was not just a mistake to regret. It was a lesson to learn from, a chance to grow, and an opportunity to change his approach to policing. Jonathan also spoke about empathy and human connection. He explained that every person an officer encounters has a story, a background, and a perspective that might not be immediately visible. Acting with understanding and patience could prevent unnecessary conflict and build trust. Daniel realized that he had ignored this aspect the night before. He had acted on assumptions without considering the man's perspective or the broader context. Hearing Jonathan's words, he felt a mix of shame and clarity. He understood the importance of seeing people fully before making judgments. The conversation moved toward practical steps. Jonathan encouraged Daniel to take responsibility, not through punishment alone, but through learning, reflection, and improved behavior. He suggested attending training sessions on community engagement, bias awareness, and decision-making under pressure. He emphasized the importance of communication, listening, and patience. Daniel began to see that change was possible, that he could become a better officer, and that this incident could be a turning point in his career. Jonathan also addressed the broader impact of the incident. He explained how actions like Daniel's could affect public trust, community relationships, and the perception of the entire department. He encouraged Daniel to think beyond himself, to consider the community, and to take proactive steps to rebuild confidence. Daniel realized that being a police officer was not just about enforcing rules. It was about serving people, earning respect, and leading with integrity. As the meeting went on, Daniel began to ask questions. He wanted to know how to prevent similar mistakes, how to approach difficult situations differently, and how to earn back trust. Jonathan answered thoughtfully, giving clear advice and sharing strategies he had developed over years of experience. He emphasized that reflection, humility, and willingness to learn were key to personal growth and professional improvement. Daniel felt encouraged, understanding that guidance and mentorship could be more powerful than criticism or punishment. By the end of the meeting, Daniel felt a shift within himself. The fear, anxiety, and shame he had carried began to give way to understanding, clarity, and resolve. He realized that the encounter had been a gift in disguise. It forced him to confront his weaknesses, reflect on his actions, and learn from someone he respected. Jonathan's calmness, wisdom, and patience had transformed a potentially humiliating situation into a profound lesson. Outside the office, the world continued to react to the incident. Social media buzzed, discussions in the community persisted, and opinions varied widely. Yet inside the department, change had already begun. Daniel's willingness to learn and Jonathan's guidance set an example for other officers. Conversations about behavior, accountability, and empathy became more common. The incident, once a source of tension, began to spark reflection and improvement. Daniel left the office with a sense of purpose. He understood that his actions would have consequences, but he also knew that he could now choose how to respond moving forward. He felt a responsibility not only to the community but to himself, to uphold the values of integrity, respect, and fairness. The lessons from the meeting with Jonathan were clear. Patience, observation, and empathy were essential in every decision he would make as a police officer. Over the following days, Daniel began implementing what he had learned. He approached interactions with more caution, listening before acting and considering the perspective of others. He engaged with the community, seeking to understand their concerns, fears, and experiences. Slowly, people began to notice a difference in his behavior. His actions reflected growth, responsibility, and a sincere desire to serve with fairness. Jonathan continued to guide him, offering advice, feedback, and support. The mentorship was not about punishment, but about transformation. Daniel realized that real learning often came through guidance and reflection, and that mistakes could become stepping stones if met with openness and humility. The relationship between mentor and mentee strengthened, grounded in trust, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to the community. Meanwhile, the town slowly began to respond positively. People noticed changes in the department. Discussions in the community shifted from anger to cautious optimism, and small acts of goodwill were highlighted in local conversations. Jonathan's leadership, characterized by patience, clarity, and fairness, began to reshape perceptions. The incident, once a symbol of fear and misunderstanding, now became a catalyst for growth and improvement. Daniel's internal transformation mirrored the external changes. He felt a deeper connection to the community, a stronger sense of responsibility, and a renewed commitment to his role. The meeting with Jonathan had been more than a conversation. It had been a turning point. He realized that leadership was about more than rank or authority. It was about guidance, integrity, and the ability to inspire change through example. As days turned into weeks, Daniel continued to grow under Jonathan's mentorship. He became more aware of his actions, more thoughtful in his decisions, and more committed to serving the community with respect and fairness. The incident that had once caused shame and fear had now become a powerful lesson in accountability, leadership, and personal growth. Jonathan, observing these changes, felt a quiet satisfaction. He knew that guiding someone like Daniel required patience, understanding, and a willingness to teach rather than punish. The results were evident, not only in Daniel's behavior but in the way the department and the community began to respond. Trust was being rebuilt, relationships were improving, and the foundation for lasting positive change was being laid. By the end of this period, the incident that had once seemed so negative had been transformed into a story of learning, mentorship, and growth. Daniel understood the importance of humility, patience, and reflection. He realized that mistakes were not the end of a career, but opportunities to become a better officer, a better colleague, and a better member of the community. The town, too, began to see the change. People shared stories of officers approaching situations with more care, of misunderstandings being resolved calmly, and of a growing sense of trust in the department. Jonathan's leadership had set the tone, and Daniel's willingness to learn had shown that transformation was possible. The incident, once a source of tension, had become a symbol of hope, growth, and the power of mentorship. And though Daniel would never forget the fear, the mistake, and the lessons learned that night, he now carried them not as a burden but as guidance. He understood that leadership, accountability, and empathy could turn even the most difficult moments into opportunities for positive change. The meeting with Jonathan had not only altered his career, it had altered his perspective, his approach, and his understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect. The weeks following the incident became a time of change, growth, and reflection not just for Officer Daniel, but for the entire police department and the community it served. Daniel had begun to see his role in a completely new way. He realized that being a police officer was not just about enforcing rules or reacting quickly in tense moments. It was about understanding people, seeing their humanity, and building trust. Every decision mattered, every action had consequences, and now he approached each situation with thoughtfulness, awareness, and empathy. Under Jonathan's guidance, Daniel attended workshops and training sessions that went beyond traditional police work. He learned about bias awareness, communication, conflict resolution, and community engagement. These sessions were not lectures. They were discussions, reflections, and opportunities to practice real-world skills. Daniel discovered that listening carefully to people, understanding their perspective, and showing respect could prevent conflicts long before they started. He began to recognize that the power of an officer was not in authority or intimidation, but in the ability to foster understanding and cooperation. Jonathan also encouraged Daniel to engage directly with the community. Daniel started attending town meetings, participating in local programs, and talking with residents who had previously been skeptical or fearful of the police. At first, some people were